My name is Gwen, and at 28 years old, I discovered my father standing in my childhood bedroom destroying my wedding dress with scissors. My brother Daniel smirked from the doorway. Choose Gwen. It's either that gold digger or your family. My wedding was in 3 days. The dress my late grandmother's altered gown lay in ribbons. My father's eyes were cold, unfamiliar. You marry him, you're dead to me. The ultimatum that would shatter everything I believed about family love and loyalty began with those scissors cutting through silk. Before we dive into this heartbreaking story of family betrayal and unexpected strength, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy stories about overcoming family drama and finding true love against all odds. Your support means everything, and I promise this story will take you on an emotional journey you won't forget. Let's explore how sometimes the family we choose becomes stronger than the family we're born into. Looking back now, I realize the signs were always there, hidden beneath the surface of what I thought was our perfect family. My father, Richard, had been my hero growing up, a successful businessman who built his construction company from nothing into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. He was the kind of dad who never missed a school play or soccer game, who taught me to ride a bike and change a tire, who told me I could be anything I wanted to be. After Mom passed away when I was 15 from a sudden heart attack, he became both parents rolled into one, holding our family together through the darkest time of our lives. My brother Daniel, 3 years older than me, transformed overnight from typical annoying big brother to fierce protector. He drove me to school every morning, scared away boys he deemed unworthy, and made sure I never felt alone in my grief. We grew closer than ever during those difficult years, and I thought nothing could break the bond we'd forged through shared loss. Daniel went on to become a successful financial advisor, following in Dad's entrepreneurial footsteps, while I pursued my passion for graphic design, eventually landing a job at a prominent marketing firm downtown. Life was good, or so I believed. Then 2 years ago, I met Jake at a charity fundraiser for underprivileged youth. He wasn't like the polished businessmen and ambitious lawyers my father usually introduced me to at company events. Jake was a middle school science teacher who spent his weekends volunteering at the homeless shelter and coaching kids basketball at the community center. His eyes lit up when he talked about his students, about the moment when a struggling kid finally understood a difficult concept. He made me laugh with his terrible science puns and won my heart with his genuine kindness. Our first date lasted 8 hours. We talked about everything from our favorite books to our dreams for the future. Jake told me about growing up with parents who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet, how he'd gotten through college on scholarships and student loans, determined to become the teacher who could change kids' lives the way his high school chemistry teacher had changed his. I shared stories about my mother, about the hole her death had left in our family, about how I'd learned to find joy again through art and design. By the end of the night, I knew I'd found something special. Daniel was actually the first family member to meet Jake. I'd invited them both to lunch, nervous about how my protective brother would react. To my surprise and relief, they hit it off immediately. Daniel laughed at Jake's jokes, asked about his teaching methods, even invited him to join our monthly family dinners. "Dad, he's perfect for Gwen," Daniel told our father later. "He's got a good head on his shoulders, treats her right. Not like those jerks from her college days." Dad welcomed Jake with open arms, joking about finally getting the son he'd always wanted, someone who could talk sports without glazing over when the conversation turned to business. For over a year, everything was wonderful. Jake became part of our family traditions. He helped Dad with yard work, debated politics with Daniel, and even learned Mom's secret recipe for apple pie from her handwritten cookbook I'd saved. Our relationship deepened naturally, built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love. When Jake proposed on our 18-month anniversary, recreating our first date down to the terrible science puns, I said yes, without hesitation. He'd asked my father's permission first, old-fashioned as it was, and Dad had given his blessing enthusiastically. The engagement celebration at our family home was picture perfect. Dad made a toast about gaining a son, not losing a daughter. Daniel clapped Jake on the back and welcomed him officially to the family. Jake's parents, lovely people who ran a small hardware store in the suburbs, mingled easily with our family friends. Monica, Daniel's wife of 4 years, helped me start planning the wedding, immediately spreading bridal magazines across the dining room table as we dreamed about flowers and venues. Even Aunt Helen, Mom's sister, who'd stepped in as a maternal figure over the years, declared Jake a keeper. We decided on a fall wedding, giving us 9 months to plan. I wanted to wear my grandmother's wedding dress, a stunning vintage gown that had been carefully preserved in our attic. The seamstress said it would need significant alterations to fit me properly, but the silk and lace were still in beautiful condition. Dad got emotional when I showed him, remembering how his mother had looked on her wedding day. "This dress has been waiting for you, sweetheart," he said, kissing my forehead. "Your grandmother would be so proud." The first hint of trouble came about 6 months before the wedding. We were having our usual family dinner when Daniel casually asked Jake about his financial planning for the future. It seemed like normal conversation at first, Daniel offering professional advice to his future brother-in-law, but his questions grew increasingly pointed. How much exactly did teachers make? What about his student loans? Did he have investments? A retirement plan? Jake answered honestly, explaining that while teachers didn't make fortune, he was careful with money and had a solid plan to pay off his loans within 5 years. Daniel's expression remained neutral, but I caught him exchanging glances with Dad. Over the next few weeks, I noticed subtle changes in my father's behavior toward Jake. Where he'd once greeted him warmly, now there was a coolness in his demeanor. He started making comments about Jake's career choice, wondering aloud why such a smart man had settled for teaching when he could have pursued something more lucrative. "Teaching is noble, sure," he'd say, "but a man needs to be able to provide for his family." Jake handled the comments gracefully, explaining that he found fulfillment in his work that money couldn't buy. But I could see the hurt in his eyes. Family dinners became increasingly strained. Daniel would steer conversations toward financial topics, dropping references to successful friends who'd made millions in tech or real estate. Dad would nod approvingly while I sat there growing more uncomfortable by the minute. Monica started giving me sympathetic looks across the table, occasionally trying to change the subject to wedding planning. But even those conversations became minefields. When I mentioned the caterer, Jake and I had chosen a local family business with amazing food, but modest prices, Daniel suggested we consider the country club instead. "You only get married once, Gwen. Don't you want the best?" The turning point came when Jake's parents joined us for dinner to discuss wedding plans. It should have been a joyful occasion, two families coming together. Instead, it was excruciating. Dad barely spoke to Jake's father, responding to his attempts at conversation with curt, one-word answers. When Jake's mother complimented our home, Dad made a point of mentioning how hard he'd worked to provide such luxury for his family, implying that some people simply had different standards. Daniel was worse, making snide remarks about Jake's father's hardware store, questioning whether small businesses could survive in today's economy, suggesting maybe Jake's teaching salary would need to support his parents in retirement. I was mortified. After Jake's parents left, clearly hurt and confused by the cold reception, I confronted my family. "What is wrong with you?" I demanded. "These are good, kind people who raised an amazing son. Why are you treating them like they're beneath us?" Dad dismissed my concerns, saying I was being too sensitive. Daniel insisted he was just making conversation, that I was reading too much into innocent questions. But I knew better. Something had shifted in my family's attitude toward Jake, and I was determined to find out why. Monica pulled me aside as she and Daniel were leaving. She whispered quickly, looking over her shoulder to make sure Daniel wasn't listening. "Something's going on, Gwen. Daniel's been acting strange, making phone calls late at night, meeting with someone downtown. I think you need to be careful." Before I could ask what she meant, Daniel called for her impatiently and she hurried away. That night, I told Jake about the strange behavior, about Monica's warning. He held me close and promised that whatever was happening, we'd face it together. Neither of us could have imagined how prophetic those words would become. The morning after Dad destroyed my grandmother's wedding dress was a blur of shock and tears. I sat on my childhood bedroom floor, gathering the ruined pieces of silk and lace, trying to comprehend how my father, the man who'd raised me to value family above all else, could do something so cruel. My hands shook as I called Jake, barely able to get the words out through my sobs. He was at my parents' house within 20 minutes, despite it being a workday morning. The moment he walked through the door and saw the destroyed dress, his face went pale, then flushed with anger I'd never seen before. While Jake held me as I cried, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Dad's right, Gwen. Jake's using you. Open your eyes before it's too late. We have proof." The word proof sent a chill down my spine. What could they possibly have against Jake, the most honest, genuine person I'd ever known? Jake read the message over my shoulder, his jaw tightening. "Let them show whatever they think they have," he said quietly. "I have nothing to hide. We've built our relationship on truth, and no manufactured evidence will change that." That afternoon, Daniel arrived at my apartment with a manila folder, looking grimly satisfied. "I hired a private investigator," he announced, as if this was perfectly reasonable behavior. "For your own protection. You need to see who you're really marrying." My stomach turned as he spread documents across my coffee table: bank statements, credit reports, loan documents, all belonging to Jake. The violation of privacy was staggering, but Daniel seemed oblivious to the ethical implications. "Look at this debt, Gwen. 60,000 in student loans, credit card balances. This is what he's bringing to your marriage." I stared at my brother in disbelief. "Are you seriously telling me you hired someone to spy on my fiancé because he has student loans? Like millions of other Americans who went to college." The credit card debt he'd already told me about from when his father had cancer 2 years ago, and Jake helped with medical bills. Daniel's expression hardened. "You're being naive. A man with this much debt sees you as a meal ticket. Dad's protected you, your whole life, built wealth for our family. Jake sees dollar signs when he looks at you, not love." Jake, who'd been silent during Daniel's presentation, finally spoke. "You're right about one thing, Daniel. I do see dollar signs, the ones I'm still paying off from my education, an investment I made in myself to become a teacher. The ones I spent to help my family during a health crisis. If that makes me a gold digger in your eyes, then you understand nothing about real life outside your privileged bubble. And if you think I'm with Gwen for money, then you don't know your sister at all. She's brilliant, funny, creative, and kind. I'd love her if she was broke." Daniel scoffed, gathering his papers. "Dad won't stand for this. He's already talking about changing his will, cutting you out if you go through with this wedding. The trust fund Grandma left you, Dad controls it until you're 30. Marry Jake, and you'll never see a penny. Choose wisely, sister." With that, he left, slamming the door behind him. I sank onto the couch, overwhelmed by the ultimatum. Jake sat beside me, taking my hand. "Whatever you decide, I'll understand," he said. "I won't be the reason you lose your family." The next morning, I drove to Aunt Helen's house, desperate for perspective from someone who'd known our family dynamics longer than anyone. She made us tea and listened as I poured out the whole story. When I finished, she sighed deeply. "There's something you need to know about your father's business, sweetheart. Something he's been hiding." She revealed that Dad's company had lost a major contract last year due to a bidding scandal. While he'd managed to keep it out of the papers, the financial hit had been severe. He's been scrambling to maintain appearances, keep up the lifestyle, pay for Daniel's house, the cars, the country club memberships. The revelation stunned me. "But what does this have to do with Jake?" I asked. Helen shook her head sadly. "Your father's always been about control, especially after your mother died. He controls the money, the family image, the business." Daniel's followed in his footsteps, maybe even worse. They see Jake as a threat to that control. A teacher with middle-class parents doesn't fit their vision for the family. And maybe, just Maybe they're worried about protecting assets that aren't as secure as they pretend. Your inheritance, your trust fund, it's all tied up in the company. If the company fails. I left Helen's house with my mind reeling. That evening, Jake surprised me by suggesting we visit my father together. I want to make this right, he said. Maybe if I offer to sign a prenup, prove I don't want the money, he'll see I'm sincere. I knew it wouldn't work, but I admired Jake's willingness to try. We found Dad in his study, bourbon in hand, looking older than I'd ever seen him. The conversation was brief and brutal. I don't care if you sign away rights to every penny, he said, not even looking at Jake. You're not good enough for my daughter. You'll drag her down to your level, and I won't watch it happen. As we left, Monica was waiting by our car. She glanced nervously at the house before speaking quickly. Daniel's been obsessed with this for months. It's not really about Jake. He's convinced himself he's protecting you, but it's more than that. Since your mom died, he's seen you as his responsibility. He can't handle the idea of someone else being the most important man in your life. And your father Daniel's been feeding his fears, manipulating him. I've heard the conversations. Daniel tells him Jake will convince you to cut ties with the family, that you'll give away your inheritance to charity or something. He's playing on every fear your dad has about losing control. The next blow came 2 days later, when Carl Morrison, Dad's business partner of 20 years, called me at work. Gwen, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you need to know what Daniel's been doing. He explained that Daniel had been making calls to business associates, spreading rumors that Jake was under investigation for inappropriate conduct with students. He's being careful, making it sound like concern rather than accusations, but the damage is being done. People are starting to ask questions. If this reaches Jake's school, it could destroy his career. My blood ran cold. I immediately called Jake, but he already knew. His principal had received an anonymous complaint that morning, complete with vague allegations of inappropriate behavior with female students. The accusations were so obviously false that the principal almost dismissed them, but protocol required a formal investigation. Jake was placed on administrative leave, effective immediately pending the outcome. His voice was steady, but I could hear the pain underneath. I've devoted my life to these kids, Gwen. To have someone try to destroy that, to use my students as weapons against me, it's the cruelest thing they could do. I drove straight to Daniel's office building, fury overriding caution. His secretary tried to stop me, but I stormed past her into his corner office. He was on the phone laughing about something, but his expression darkened when he saw me. "I'll call you back," he said, hanging up. The confrontation that followed was explosive. "How dare you try to destroy Jake's career?" I screamed. "Those children mean everything to him. You're not just attacking him, you're potentially hurting every student who needs him." Daniel remained infuriatingly calm. "If he has nothing to hide, the investigation will clear him. I'm just protecting you from making the biggest mistake of your life." The argument escalated until Daniel's security arrived to escort me out. As they led me away, Daniel called after me. "I'd rather see you alone for the rest of your life than married to that man. You'll thank me someday when you realize what I saved you from." But it wasn't salvation he was offering. It was a prison of his own, making bars forged from control and manipulation. Outside the building, I called the only lawyer I knew, a friend from college who specialized in defamation cases. We were going to fight back against these lies no matter what it cost. The local news picked up the story that evening. "Popular teacher suspended pending investigation," the headline read. They didn't name Jake, but in our small suburb, everyone would know by morning. The reporter mentioned anonymous allegations and noted that the school was taking them seriously. What they didn't mention was that the anonymous source was my own brother, that this was a calculated attack designed to force me to choose between love and family. But the choice had already been made for me. By trying to destroy the man I loved, my father and brother had destroyed any chance of remaining in my life. The news coverage of Jake's suspension transformed our quiet life into a public spectacle overnight. Within 48 hours, what had started as an anonymous complaint had snowballed into a full-blown scandal fueled by carefully placed rumors and strategic manipulation. Parents at Jake's school began posting on social media, demanding answers, calling for his immediate termination without waiting for the investigation's outcome. The mob mentality took hold quickly with people who'd never met Jake, suddenly experts on his guilt. What devastated us most were the posts from parents whose children Jake had personally helped, who now questioned every interaction, every after-school tutoring session, every moment of kindness he'd shown. I hired Elizabeth Brennan, a tough-as-nails attorney who specialized in defamation and wrongful termination cases. She took one look at the evidence and immediately saw the orchestrated nature of the attack. "This isn't just some concerned citizen making a complaint," she said, reviewing the timeline. "This is a coordinated assault on your fiancé's character. The timing, the way the information was disseminated, the specific language used, it all points to someone with resources and a very personal motivation." When I told her about Daniel and my father's ultimatum, her expression hardened. "We'll need to prove the connection, but if your brother is behind this, he's opened himself up to serious legal consequences." The financial blow came next. I'd always had access to a trust fund my grandmother had established for me, meant to be fully mine at 30, but accessible for emergencies with my father's approval. When I tried to withdraw money for Jake's legal defense, I discovered the account had been frozen. The bank manager, clearly uncomfortable, explained that my father had invoked his custodial rights, claiming I was making irresponsible financial decisions. Without access to those funds, I was left with my savings, which wouldn't cover a fraction of what we'd need for a proper legal defense. Jake refused to let me drain my accounts for him, insisting we'd figure out another way. That's when Monica became our unlikely ally. She showed up at my apartment late one night looking terrified but determined. She carried a small digital recorder and a flash drive. "I've been recording Daniel," she confessed. "Started a month ago when his behavior became truly frightening. You need to hear this." The recordings were damning. Daniel bragging to his business associates about how he'd neutralized the threat to our family. His voice cold and calculated, explaining how easy it had been to plant doubts about a male teacher, how society was primed to believe the worst. In one recording, he actually laughed about Jake's suspension, calling him collateral damage in protecting the family assets. When Monica tried to confront Daniel with what she knew, his response was swift and brutal. He filed for divorce the next day, citing irreconcilable differences and claiming she'd violated their prenuptial agreement by recording him without consent. He moved to freeze their joint accounts and demanded she vacate their home immediately. "I've lost everything," Monica told me, tears streaming down her face. "But I couldn't stand by and watch him destroy you, too. He's not the man I married. Or maybe he is, and I just refuse to see it. Either way, I won't be silent anymore." Meanwhile, the investigation at Jake's school continued, but it had taken on a life of its own. Daniel's initial anonymous complaint had opened the floodgates for any parent with a grievance, real or imagined, to pile on. A mother upset about her son's failing grade suddenly remembered Jake seeming too friendly. A father who'd complained about curriculum choices now questioned Jake's motivations for staying after school. The investigator, a retired police detective, was thorough and fair, but the sheer volume of sudden complaints meant the process would take weeks, maybe months. Every day Jake couldn't teach was another victory for Daniel's campaign. What we didn't expect was how far Daniel's influence reached. Sarah Chen, my best friend since college, called me in tears one afternoon. Her husband had been contacted by Daniel's firm, told that associating with me could impact their business relationships. "They're threatening to pull contracts worth hundreds of thousands," she sobbed. "I want to support you, but we just bought a house, we're trying for a baby. I'm so sorry." One by one, friends began distancing themselves. Wedding vendors started calling with excuses about scheduling conflicts. The photographer who'd been excited about our autumn ceremony suddenly had a family emergency. The florist discovered a double booking. Even the venue called to express concerns about the negative publicity. Our investigation revealed the full extent of Daniel's business manipulations. He'd leveraged his financial advisory firm's connections, offering lucrative deals to anyone who cut ties with us, and threatened economic consequences for those who didn't. Small business owners who depended on referrals from Daniel's wealthy clients couldn't afford to risk their livelihoods. The caterer we'd chosen called personally to apologize, admitting Daniel had threatened to destroy their reputation among the country club set. "We're a family business," the owner explained. "One bad word from someone like your brother, and we're finished." "I understand," I told him, even as my heart broke a little more. Jake's family, already hurt by my father's treatment, now found themselves under scrutiny, too. Someone we could guess who had reported their hardware store to various regulatory agencies, triggering inspections and audits. Nothing was wrong, of course, but the harassment took its toll. Jake's mother called me crying, apologizing for not being able to help with legal fees. "We want to, sweetheart, but with the business under attack, we need every penny just to stay afloat." I assured her we didn't expect anything, that just their emotional support meant everything. But I could hear the strain in her voice, the weight of being punished for their son's choice to love me. The school board meeting to discuss Jake's future was scheduled for a Thursday evening. Daniel made sure it was packed with his allies' parents he'd convinced or coerced into attending. But we had our own support. Jake's fellow teachers came in force, armed with statistics about his impact on student performance. Former students now in high school or college returned to speak about how Mr. Morrison had changed their lives. One young woman, now pre-med at university, credits Jake with believing in her when no one else did. A boy who'd been failing until Jake's innovative teaching methods reached him, now headed to engineering school. The testimony was powerful, but Daniel had one more card to play. He'd hired actors to pose as parents of former students, complete with fabricated stories of concerning behavior. They were good, trained to cry on cue, to seem genuinely distressed. If Elizabeth hadn't discovered the talent agency payments in Daniel's financial records, their testimony might have been believed. When she presented this evidence to the board, along with Monica's recordings of Daniel admitting to orchestrating the whole thing, the room erupted. Parents who'd been swayed by the lies began questioning everything. The board voted to end the investigation and reinstate Jake immediately, but the damage to his reputation lingered. Through all of this, my father remained Daniel's staunchest ally. Even when presented with evidence of Daniel's lies and manipulation, he refused to accept the truth. "That woman's trying to destroy our family," he said about Monica. "Jake's turned you against us, poisoned your mind. You're so blinded by infatuation that you can't see what's right in front of you." The man who'd taught me to value truth above all else now clung to lies because they supported his worldview. It was like watching someone I loved disappear, replaced by a stranger wearing his face. The financial warfare escalated when my own employer began receiving complaints about my work performance. Anonymous emails questioned my professionalism, suggested I was distracted, unreliable. My boss thankfully saw through it immediately. "Gwen, you're one of my best designers. These complaints are obviously fabricated, but I need you to know someone's trying hard to damage your career." I appreciated his support, but the stress was overwhelming. Every day brought new attacks from unexpected angles, each designed to break our spirit, to force us to surrender to Daniel and my father's demands. One evening, exhausted and demoralized, Jake and I seriously discussed eloping. We could leave quietly, get married at City Hall, start fresh somewhere new where Daniel's reach couldn't follow. But as tempting as escape was, something in me rebelled. "If we run, they win," I said. "Every couple they bully in the future, every person Daniel destroys because they don't fit his image, that's on us for not standing up to them." Jake agreed, pulling me close. "Then we make our stand. We have our wedding as planned, surrounded by whoever's brave enough to support us. We show them that love is stronger than their hate." Unknown to us, Aunt Helen had been quietly organizing resistance within the extended family. Cousins who'd been threatened with disinheritance if they supported me were growing tired of my father's tyranny. Family friends who'd known my mother were appalled by what Richard had become. She created a secret network, people willing to help with wedding preparations away from Daniel's prying eyes. My mother would be devastated to see what's happening, Helen told them. She believed in love and family supporting each other. What Richard and Daniel are doing is a betrayal of everything she stood for. 3 weeks before our wedding, Daniel escalated his campaign to a level of cruelty I hadn't imagined possible. The restraining order arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who looked apologetic as he handed me the papers. Daniel had filed claiming Jake had threatened him with physical violence during a confrontation that never happened. He'd provided witness statements from 2 of his business associates, who swore they'd seen Jake corner Daniel in a parking garage, making verbal threats about what would happen if he didn't stop interfering in our lives. The alleged incident had supposedly occurred at a time when Jake was actually teaching a parent-teacher conference with dozens of witnesses to his whereabouts. The court date was set strategically for the day before our wedding, clearly intended to create maximum chaos and stress. Elizabeth was furious when she reviewed the filing. "This is blatant perjury," she said. "They're banking on the fact that even if we can prove it's false, the damage will be done. A restraining order on record, even a dismissed one, follows someone forever." It was another calculated move to destroy Jake's teaching career, adding legal troubles to the already damaging suspension scandal. What kind of brother does this? I wondered aloud, and Elizabeth's response chilled me. The kind who sees you as property, not a person. The court hearing was a spectacle of lies and manipulation. My father took the stand as a witness for Daniel, claiming he too had witnessed Jake's aggressive behavior on multiple occasions. He spoke with such conviction about incidents that never happened that I almost doubted my own memory. "Your Honor, this young man has shown a pattern of violence and intimidation toward my family," my father testified. "I fear for my son's safety and my daughter's well-being. She's been brainwashed by this man, can't see the danger she's in." Watching my father lie under oath, seeing the man who'd raised me to value honesty above all else perjure himself to destroy my happiness, broke something inside me that would never fully heal. Jake's attorney systematically destroyed their case. Security footage from the parking garage showed no confrontation. The witnesses crumbled under cross-examination, admitting they couldn't actually recall specific details. Phone records and attendance logs proved Jake was teaching when the alleged threat occurred. The judge, clearly irritated by the waste of court time and the obvious fabrication, not only dismissed the restraining order, but warned Daniel and his witnesses about the consequences of perjury. "Mr. Carlyle," the judge said sternly, "it's clear to this court that you've attempted to use the legal system as a weapon in a personal vendetta. Any further false claims will result in criminal charges." But Daniel had achieved his goal. The local newspaper ran a story about the restraining order filing before the dismissal, ensuring maximum damage to Jake's reputation. "Teacher accused of threatening future brother-in-law," the headline screamed. The dismissal would be buried in a small retraction days later, but the damage was done. Parents who'd been starting to support Jake after the school board meeting now questioned their judgment again. "Maybe where there's smoke, there's fire," I heard one mother say at the grocery store. "All these allegations can't be made up." The court of public opinion didn't care about evidence or truth. The school board, despite voting to reinstate Jake, now faced renewed pressure. A carefully orchestrated campaign of parents packed another emergency meeting, demanding Jake's permanent removal. Daniel had learned from his mistakes this time. The parents were real, just manipulated and misinformed rather than hired actors. They spoke passionately about their fears about not feeling safe with Jake teaching their children. One father actually cried, saying he couldn't sleep at night, worrying about what might happen. It was a masterclass in crowd manipulation, fear-mongering at its finest. That's when Jake's students took matters into their own hands. Led by Aisha Williams, the student council president, they organized a walkout in support of their teacher. Hundreds of students left class, gathering in the parking lot with handmade signs. "Mr. Morrison saved my life," one read. Another said, "Real teachers change lives. Fake accusations destroy them." They shared stories on social media about how Jake had impacted them, tutoring them for free, believing in them when no one else did, making science fun and accessible. The hashtag Team Morrison began trending locally, a grassroots movement of young people who refused to let lies destroy someone they loved. Former students flew in from colleges across the country, taking time from their studies to support the teacher who'd changed their lives. Maria Santos, now at MIT, spoke to reporters about how Jake had spent countless unpaid hours helping her prepare for science competitions. "Without Mr. Morrison, I'd never have believed a girl like me could study at MIT," she said. "He didn't just teach us science, he taught us to believe in ourselves." Story after story emerged, painting a picture of a dedicated educator whose only crime was falling in love with someone whose family didn't approve. But even as support grew, the attacks intensified. My bank accounts, which had already been under strain, were suddenly frozen. Not just the trust fund my father controlled, but my personal checking and savings accounts. When I went to the bank, confused and panicked, the manager explained that someone had reported suspicious activity, triggering a federal investigation into potential money laundering. The report was anonymous, of course, but claimed I was funneling money to support criminal activities. The investigation would take weeks to resolve, during which I had no access to my own salary, my own savings, nothing. I was financially crippled overnight. We survived on Jake's credit cards and the kindness of the few friends brave enough to help us. Mia Chen, despite her husband's fears, secretly lent us money for groceries and gas. Jake's fellow teachers took up a collection to help with legal fees. But the psychological toll was immense. Every day brought new challenges, new attacks from unexpected angles. Anonymous letters arrived at our apartment complex, sent to all our neighbors, claiming we were involved in illegal activities. Someone spray-painted "Predator" on Jake's car. Our home, which had been our sanctuary, became a place of constant stress and fear. The vandalism escalated. Windows, broken tires, slashed threatening messages left on our door. When we called the police, they took reports but seemed reluctant to investigate aggressively. One officer actually suggested that maybe we should consider moving for our own safety, given the strong feelings in the community. It wasn't until Elizabeth discovered that Daniel had donated significantly to the Police Benevolent Association that we understood why. His influence reached everywhere, a web of financial incentives and implied threats that made fighting back feel impossible. My job, which my boss had initially protected, came under increased pressure. Major clients began calling, expressing concerns about my continued employment. One actually said they'd heard I was involved in covering up criminal behavior at a local school. Others were more subtle, simply suggesting that perhaps someone with so much personal drama wasn't the right fit for their campaigns. My boss held out as long as he could, but when our biggest client threatened to pull their entire account, he had no choice. "I'm putting you on unpaid leave," he said sadly, "just until this blows over. We both know it won't impact your work, but I can't lose half my business. I need you to understand." Monica, living with us now since Daniel had successfully evicted her from their home, became our lifeline to understanding his next moves. She'd maintained access to one shared email account he'd forgotten about, allowing her glimpses into his planning. What she discovered next made our blood run cold. Daniel was orchestrating what he called the nuclear option for our wedding day. He'd hired investigators to dig deeper into Jake's past, looking for anything that could be twisted. When they found nothing, he'd decided to create something. The plan was to have Jake arrested at the altar on fabricated assault charges, with witnesses ready to swear they'd seen him attack someone the night before. The witnesses were already lined up, their stories coordinated, their backgrounds clean enough to seem credible. They'd claimed Jake had been drinking, had gotten violent when someone made a comment about the allegations against him. Daniel had even scouted the supposed location, a bar Jake had never been to, ensuring they had details that would sound convincing. Security footage would conveniently be corrupted. The arrest would be public, humiliating, devastating. Even when the charges were eventually dropped, the image of Jake being hauled away from our wedding would define us forever. We met with Elizabeth, immediately developing a counter strategy. She hired our own investigators to follow the fake witnesses documenting their meetings with Daniel, recording their practice sessions. We alerted Jake's lawyer, ensuring he'd be ready with bail and alibis. But the stress of knowing what they planned, of having to prepare for an attack on what should be the happiest day of our lives, was overwhelming. I found myself unable to sleep, jumping at every sound, wondering what new horror each day would bring. Jake tried to stay strong for both of us, but I could see the toll in his eyes, the way his hands shook when he thought I wasn't looking. 3 days before the wedding, Aunt Helen called with a warning. "Your father's planning something," she said urgently. "He won't tell anyone what, but he's been meeting with lawyers, making calls. I think he's going to try to have you declared mentally incompetent." Claim Jake's manipulating someone who's not capable of making rational decisions. "Be very careful, sweetheart. Document everything. Don't give them any ammunition." The idea that my father would try to have me declared mentally incompetent to stop my wedding was so horrifying, so beyond anything I'd imagined, that I actually laughed. It was either that or scream. That night, Jake and I sat together in our vandalized apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of our normal life, and made a decision. "Whatever happens, we get married," I said. "If they arrest you, I'll bail you out, and we'll do it at the courthouse. If they declare me incompetent, we'll fight it and win. If we have to get married in a cardboard box with no one but the officiant, that's what we'll do. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about them. It's about us, our love, our commitment to each other." Jake kissed me then, and for a moment all the chaos faded away. "You're right," he said. "They can take everything else, but they can't take that." 3 days before our wedding, Monica made a discovery that would change everything. She'd been going through old financial documents from her marriage to Daniel, looking for anything that might help in her divorce proceedings, when she found a series of encrypted files on a backup drive Daniel had forgotten about. It took her former colleague, a forensic accountant, less than an hour to crack the encryption and reveal the devastating truth within. Daniel had been embezzling from our father's company for years, siphoning money through shell corporations and offshore accounts. The scale was staggering: over $2 million systematically stolen since shortly after our mother's death. The documentation was meticulous and damning. Falsified invoices, redirected payments, contracts with phantom vendors that led directly back to Daniel's personal accounts. He'd been careful, taking small amounts over time, covering his tracks by pointing fingers at others whenever discrepancies arose. 2 former employees had been fired over the years for financial irregularities that we now knew Daniel had orchestrated. But the most shocking revelation was his recent acceleration. In the months since Jake and I got engaged, Daniel had tripled his theft rate, apparently panicking about something. The forensic accountant had a theory. He knew an outside audit was coming. Marriage means new family, new eyes on the business. He couldn't risk Jake or Jake's family asking questions. Monica and I sat in Elizabeth's office, staring at the evidence spread across the conference table. "This is why he's been so desperate to stop your wedding," Elizabeth said, piecing it together. "It's not about protecting family assets. It's about protecting his crime. Jake represents outside scrutiny, someone who might notice irregularities, ask uncomfortable questions. Daniel needed to discredit Jake completely, make him seem like a threat to the family, so that when the truth eventually came out, he could claim Jake had set him up. The victim becomes the villain. Classic misdirection. The scope of Daniel's deception was breathtaking, but it finally made sense of his increasingly frantic behavior. We decided to confront my father first, hoping that, faced with irrefutable evidence, he'd finally see the truth about his son. I called him, asking to meet at his office, saying it was about the wedding. He agreed, probably hoping I was coming to capitulate. When we arrived, Jake, Monica, Elizabeth, and I, he was sitting behind his massive oak desk, the picture of patriarchal authority. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying," he said coldly. But his expression changed as Elizabeth began laying out the evidence document by document, transaction by transaction. His face went from dismissive to confused to horrified as the reality sank in. "This is impossible," he whispered, his hands shaking as he examined the papers. "Daniel handles the finances, has since your mother died. He wouldn't. He couldn't." But the evidence was overwhelming. Every forged signature, every redirected payment, every shell company led back to Daniel. I watched my father age 10 years in 10 minutes as he realized his son had been stealing from him, from the company he'd built with his own hands, from the legacy he'd meant to leave his children. The golden child he'd trusted implicitly, who'd turned him against me, who'd convinced him Jake was the threat, had been the real danger all along. "We need to verify this independently." My father said, his voice hollow. He called his oldest friend, William Sterling, the company's external auditor who'd been postponing the annual audit at Daniel's request. "William, I need you here now. Emergency audit. Everything. Daniel's personal accounts, too." "Yes, I know what I'm saying." Within an hour, William and his team had descended on the office, and within 3 hours, they'd confirmed everything Monica had found, and more. The theft went deeper than even we'd realized, with Daniel having sold company assets to his own shell companies at massive losses, then reselling them at profit. My father's world crumbled as each new revelation emerged. The son he'd defended so fiercely, who'd manipulated him into destroying his relationship with me, had been systematically robbing him blind. But even faced with overwhelming evidence, some part of him couldn't accept it. There must be an explanation, he kept saying. Daniel wouldn't do this. Someone else must be involved. Maybe Jake. Elizabeth cut him off sharply. "Mr. Morrison was in middle school when this theft began. Are you really so blinded by your prejudice that you'd blame a child for your adult son's crimes?" The accusation hung in the air, stark and undeniable. Our wedding day arrived with Daniel still free but under investigation. He'd hired the best criminal defense attorneys money could buy, ironically, using the funds he'd stolen to pay for them. We'd taken precautions against his planned false arrest scenario, ensuring Jake had alibis for every moment and witnesses to his whereabouts. But as I stood in the bridal suite at the modest venue we'd managed to book last minute, wearing a simple dress bought off the rack, to replace my grandmother's destroyed gown, I felt a mix of sadness and liberation. The fairy tale wedding I'd dreamed of was gone, but something more precious had taken its place, a wedding defined by truth and real love, not appearances. Aunt Helen knocked on the door, radiant in her role as my surrogate mother for the day. "Sweetheart, you look beautiful," she said, adjusting my veil. "Your mother would be so proud of how strong you've been, how you've stood up for love and truth. I've brought some people who want to see you." The door opened wider, and I gasped. Cousins I thought had abandoned me, family friends who'd been threatened into silence, all crowded into the small room. "We couldn't let them win," my cousin Marie said, hugging me tight. "Family isn't about blood or money or control. It's about love and support. We choose you, Gwen. We choose love." The ceremony itself was small, but perfect. Jake's students had formed an honor guard outside the venue, their homemade signs now reading "Love wins and truth prevails." Inside, the pews were filled with people who'd risked Daniel and my father's wrath to support us. Jake's fellow teachers, the parents who'd seen through the lies, Monica standing as my maid of honor, despite losing everything for telling the truth. When the music started and I walked down the aisle on Aunt Helen's arm, I saw Jake waiting for me, tears streaming down his face. Every struggle, every attack, every moment of doubt had led to this standing together unbroken. Jake's vows acknowledged our journey with grace and humor. "Gwen, I promise to love you through sunshine and storms, through school board meetings and family drama, through truth and lies and everything in between." You've stood by me when the world tried to tear us apart, and I promise to stand by you for whatever comes next, even if your family is a little extra," he added, getting a laugh from the crowd. "I promise to help you build a new family, one based on love, respect, and really good boundaries. Maybe some security cameras, too." His ability to find lightness, even in our darkness, was one of the many reasons I loved him. My vows were more serious, acknowledging the price we'd paid for this moment. "Jake, you've taught me that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice we make every day. When my family tried to destroy you, you responded with dignity. When lies threatened your career, you stood in truth. When it would have been easier to walk away, you stayed. I choose you not because it's easy, but because you're worth every hard moment. I promise to build a life with you based on honesty, justice, and love. A life where no one's controlling anyone, where respect matters more than money, where the family we create together is our greatest wealth." Just as we were pronounced husband and wife, the doors burst open. Daniel stood there with two police officers, his fake witnesses, behind him. "I'm sorry to interrupt one," officer said, clearly uncomfortable, "but we've received a complaint." Elizabeth stepped forward with her own stack of documents. "Officers, I think you'll find these recordings and witness statements very interesting. They detail a conspiracy to file false charges orchestrated by Mr. Carlyle there." Monica hit play on her recorder, and Daniel's voice filled the venue, explaining his plan to have Jake arrested on fabricated charges. The officer's expression shifted from apologetic to stern as they turned to Daniel. "Mr. Carlyle, you'll need to come with us," the lead officer said. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to file a false police report, witness tampering, and criminal harassment. The fake witnesses tried to flee but were stopped at the door." As Daniel was handcuffed, he looked at me with such hatred it took my breath away. "You've destroyed everything," he snarled. "Our family, our father, our legacy, all for him." My response came from the heart. "I didn't destroy anything, Daniel. I just stopped letting you destroy me. The truth destroyed you, and you have no one to blame but yourself." As they led him away, I felt no satisfaction, only sadness for the brother I'd lost long before this moment. The reception continued despite the dramatic interruption. Jake's principal stood to make a toast, announcing that the school board had not only reinstated Jake, but promoted him to science department head in recognition of his exceptional teaching and the grace he'd shown under pressure. The students who'd supported him cheered so loudly the windows shook. One by one, people stood to share how Jake had impacted their lives, how our story had inspired them to stand up against bullies in their own lives. What had started as a small, rushed wedding became a powerful testament to the strength of truth over lies. Near the end of the reception, I noticed a figure hovering by the entrance. My father stood there looking lost and broken. He'd aged dramatically in just a few days, the weight of Daniel's betrayal and his own choices etched in every line of his face. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw him struggle with whether to enter or leave. Finally, he stepped inside, moving slowly toward our table. The room grew quiet as he approached everyone, waiting to see what would happen. Jake tensed beside me, ready to protect me from whatever new attack might come. But there was no attack. My father stood before us, this man who'd once been my hero, now diminished by his own choices. "I came to—" He started, then stopped, struggling for words. "Not to apologize. I don't deserve forgiveness for what I've done. I just wanted to tell you that I was wrong. So completely wrong. About Jake. About Daniel. About everything. I let my fear and my need to control destroy the only real family I had left. You." He looked at Jake, then really looked at him for the first time. "You're a good man. Better than I ever was. Take care of her." With that, he turned to leave, but I called after him. "Dad, wait," I said, standing. "You're right that you don't deserve forgiveness, not yet. But maybe someday, if you do the work, if you get help for this need to control everything, if you truly change, maybe we can find a way forward. Not as the family we were, that's gone, but maybe as something new, something honest. He nodded, tears in his eyes, and left without another word. Jake squeezed my hand, understanding that even after everything, some part of me still loved the father I'd lost, still hoped for redemption, however unlikely. In the weeks following our wedding, the full scope of Daniel's crimes continued to unravel. The forensic audit revealed not just embezzlement, but an entire network of fraudulent activities. He'd been selling company secrets to competitors, using the insider information to make personal investments, even taking bribes from contractors in exchange for inflated contracts. The $2 million we'd initially discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. By the time investigators finished, the total exceeded $5 million in stolen funds and damages. The man who'd positioned himself as the protector of family wealth had been its greatest threat all along. Daniel's bail hearing became another battlefield. Despite the mountain of evidence against him, he maintained his innocence, claiming I'd orchestrated everything to steal our father's company. His lawyers painted a picture of a manipulative sister who'd used her naive teacher boyfriend to destroy a successful businessman out of jealousy. The narrative was so absurd it would have been laughable if it weren't so painful. Even from jail, Daniel was trying to flip the script to make himself the victim. Some people amazingly believed him, his circle of wealthy friends, people who'd benefited from his financial advice and connections, rallied to his defense, unable to accept that the man they'd trusted was a criminal. The prosecutor, thankfully, was having none of it. She systematically presented evidence dating back years before. I'd even met Jake, showing patterns of theft that began almost immediately after our mother's death. Daniel had used his grief as cover, stepping into the role of financial manager, while our father mourned, positioning himself as indispensable while robbing him blind. The judge set bail at $2 million, noting the flight risk given Daniel's offshore accounts. My father, in a move that shocked everyone, refused to post bail. "My son will face the consequences of his actions," he said quietly. "I've enabled him long enough." The company's reputation took a massive hit as news of the embezzlement became public. Clients questioned the integrity of every deal, competitors circled like vultures, and employees worried about their jobs. My father, forced to confront the reality of how badly he'd mismanaged everything, made a decision that surprised me. He hired an outside CEO, someone with no family connections, to run the company while he stepped back. I need to figure out how I became the kind of man who would destroy his daughter's happiness based on lies, he told the board. Until I do, I have no business running anything. It was the first genuinely accountable thing I'd heard him say in years. Monica's divorce proceedings became intertwined with Daniel's criminal case. His assets were frozen, but he'd hidden money in various places, and his lawyers fought viciously to protect what they could. Monica, with the support of her own excellent attorney, began revealing the extent of Daniel's controlling behavior during their marriage. Financial abuse, emotional manipulation, isolation from friends and family, the patterns were clear. He'd done to her what he'd tried to do to me, only she'd been trapped in it for years. Her testimony painted a picture of a man who viewed people as possessions, who used money and intimidation to maintain control. Jake returned to teaching with a hero's welcome. His students had decorated his classroom with banners and signs, and his first day back turned into an impromptu celebration. Parents who'd been poisoned against him lined up to apologize, ashamed of how easily they'd been manipulated. One mother broke down crying, admitting she'd almost pulled her daughter from Jake's advanced science class based on the lies. "My daughter wants to be a scientist because of you," she sobbed. "I almost took that away from her because I believed gossip over evidence. I failed as a parent, and I'm so sorry." Jake, being Jake, comforted her, explaining how sophisticated Daniel's manipulation had been. The promotion to science department head came with new responsibilities and opportunities. Jake threw himself into developing innovative curricula, creating programs to identify and nurture scientific talent in underserved communities. He started an after-school program for girls interested in STEM, naming it after Maria Santos, the former student now thriving at MIT. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that Daniel's attempts to destroy Jake's career had ultimately elevated it. Sometimes Jake told a reporter covering the story, "The worst things that happen to us clear the path for the best things." I wouldn't have chosen this journey, but I'm grateful for where it led. My own career slowly recovered. My boss, true to his word, brought me back as soon as the major client understood the truth about the harassment campaign. In fact, several clients specifically requested to work with me, impressed by how I'd handled the crisis with grace and creativity. I'd continued doing freelance work during my forced leave, creating designs that channeled my emotions into art. One piece, a visual representation of truth conquering lies, went viral after a local gallery featured it in a show about resilience. The attention led to new opportunities, including a book deal to tell our story. Family dynamics remained complicated. Cousins and relatives who'd supported us were welcomed into our new life, while those who'd sided with Daniel kept their distance. The extended family essentially split into two camps: those who valued truth and authentic relationships versus those who prioritized wealth and status. Holiday gatherings became awkward negotiations of who would attend which events. Aunt Helen hosted alternative celebrations for our side, creating new traditions free from the toxic dynamics of the past. These gatherings were smaller but filled with genuine warmth and laughter, everything family should be. My father existed in a strange limbo, neither fully excommunicated nor welcomed back. He attended therapy, both individual and group sessions, for controlling behavior. He sent letters updating me on his progress, never asking for forgiveness, but sharing insights about how his need for control had developed after Mom's death, how grief had morphed into fear of losing anyone else, which paradoxically drove everyone away. I read them but didn't respond, not ready to engage, but not willing to completely close the door. Jake supported whatever decision I made, reminding me that forgiveness was for my peace, not my father's absolution. Daniel's criminal trial was set for spring, and the prosecutor warned us it would be brutal. His defense team would try to destroy our credibility, paint us as conspirators who'd framed an innocent man. They'd hired their own investigators to dig into our backgrounds, looking for anything they could twist. When they found nothing substantial on Jake, they pivoted to attacking me, suggesting I'd been mentally unstable since my mother's death, that I'd resented Daniel's success and plotted revenge. It was exhausting having to defend our truth against their expensive lies, but we had something they didn't: actual evidence and a community of support. The whistleblowers from Dad's company started coming forward, employees who'd suspected something was wrong, but had been too afraid to speak up. Daniel had created a culture of fear, they explained, where questioning him meant risking your job. One accountant revealed he'd tried to bring discrepancies to my father's attention years ago, only to be told by Daniel that he was being paranoid, followed by a demotion that sent a clear message to others. The pattern of intimidation and manipulation extended far beyond family, affecting dozens of people who'd worked for or with the company. Through all of this, Jake and I focused on building our life together. We bought a small house in a different neighborhood, away from the memories and the vandalism. It needed work, but we threw ourselves into renovation projects, creating a space that was truly ours. Jake's parents visited often, helping with repairs and filling our home with the kind of unconditional love I'd forgotten existed. His mother taught me her family recipes, while his father and Jake built a deck in the backyard. These simple, normal moments of family life felt revolutionary after everything we'd endured. One evening, as we painted our future nursery, a room we hoped to fill someday when the chaos settled, Jake asked if I regretted anything. I thought about it seriously. I regret that my family chose greed over love, control over connection. I regret the pain you endured because you loved me. But I don't regret standing up to them, choosing you, choosing truth. If I had to do it again, knowing the cost, I'd make the same choice. Because look what we've built from the ashes of what they tried to destroy. We have real love, honest friends, meaningful work, and a future we're creating together. That's worth more than all the money and false family loyalty in the world. As Daniel's trial approached and the investigations continued, we prepared ourselves for another round of battle. But this time, we weren't fighting alone. We had an army of supporters, truth on our side, and most importantly, each other. The family that had tried to tear us apart had only made us stronger, teaching us that real family isn't about blood or money or control. It's about choosing each other again and again, especially when it's hard. And that's exactly what we intended to keep doing no matter what came next. Daniel's trial began on a rainy Tuesday in April. The courtroom packed with reporters, former employees, and family members choosing sides, one last time. He entered in an expensive suit, his legal team flanking him like bodyguards, still projecting the image of a successful businessman wrongly accused. But as witness after witness took the stand, his carefully constructed facade crumbled. Employees testified about falsified documents they'd been forced to sign. Contractors revealed the bribes they'd paid. Monica delivered devastating testimony about his patterns of control and manipulation. By the time the forensic accountants presented their findings, even Daniel's most loyal supporters couldn't deny the truth. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts, 23 charges including embezzlement, fraud, bribery, and racketeering. As the verdict was read, I watched my brother's face cycle through disbelief, rage, and finally a cold emptiness that chilled me. Even then, he couldn't accept responsibility. As court officers prepared to take him away, he turned to me with dead eyes. "I hope you're satisfied," he said. "You've destroyed our family's legacy." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Daniel. You destroyed it the moment you chose greed over love, control over connection. The legacy continues just without the poison you injected into it." My father attended every day of the trial, aging before our eyes, as the full extent of Daniel's betrayal was revealed. During a recess on the final day, he approached me in the hallway. His hands shook as he reached out, then pulled back, unsure if he had the right to seek comfort from the daughter he'd wronged. "The doctor says it was a mild stroke," he said quietly, explaining his increasing frailty. "Stress-induced. Fitting, I suppose. The man who tried to control everything losing control of his own body." I waited, saying nothing, no longer willing to fill his silences with forgiveness he hadn't earned. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. 5 years in federal prison plus restitution of all stolen funds. It was less than the prosecutor had sought, but more than Daniel's lawyers had bargained for. As he was led away in shackles, our father collapsed in the gallery. The stroke, more severe this time, left him partially paralyzed and struggling to speak. I rode in the ambulance holding the hand of a man who'd refused to hold mine on my wedding day. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. In the hospital, he managed to whisper brokenly, "I'm sorry." They were the first words of accountability he'd spoken, and, while they didn't erase the pain, they cracked open a door I'd thought permanently closed. During his recovery, I visited the hospital regularly, not out of obligation, but from a complex mix of duty, hope, and grief for the father I'd once known. Jake came with me sometimes, sitting quietly while I helped with physical therapy exercises. My father's attitude toward Jake transformed completely, the contempt replaced by genuine respect and remorse. One afternoon, struggling with his words, Dad managed to say, "Good man. Better than I deserve for you. Lucky. Very lucky." Jake, with characteristic grace, replied, "We all make mistakes, sir. What matters is learning from them. You're doing that now. That's what counts." The company, under new leadership, slowly recovered. The outside CEO implemented transparency measures and ethical guidelines that should have existed all along. She also discovered several employees Daniel had wrongfully terminated or demoted, offering them their jobs back with full restitution. Many returned believing in the company's new direction. One of them, the accountant who'd tried to expose Daniel years ago, was promoted to CFO. He implemented systems that would make future embezzlement nearly impossible. My father, from his hospital bed, signed over majority control to the board, keeping only enough shares to provide for his medical care. Monica's divorce was finalized just before Daniel reported to prison. She received a fair settlement, though much of Daniel's assets went to restitution and legal fees. More importantly, she received her freedom and validation. The court recognized the financial and emotional abuse she'd endured, setting precedent for other victims of similar manipulation. She used her experience to become an advocate, speaking at women's shelters about recognizing controlling behavior before it escalates. Our friendship, forged in the crucible of shared trauma, became one of the unexpected gifts from the entire ordeal. Jake and I settled into a rhythm of normal life that felt extraordinary after so much chaos. Mornings began with coffee on our back deck. Evenings ended with walks through our neighborhood, where no one whispered about us anymore. His students flourished under his leadership as department head. 3 of his girls won the state science fair with projects he'd mentored. The after-school STEM program grew so popular, they had to add sessions. Parents who'd once demanded his termination now competed to get their children into his classes. Success, as they say, is the best revenge, though, for Jake. It was never about revenge, only about doing what he loved. My design career reached new heights. The book about our experience, illustrated with my artwork depicting truth versus deception, became a bestseller. Speaking engagements followed, sharing our story with others facing family manipulation and control. I donated half the proceeds to organizations supporting teachers wrongly accused and families torn apart by financial abuse. The other half went into a scholarship fund for students pursuing education degrees. If Daniel's legacy was greed and control, ours would be generosity and empowerment. Every student who became a teacher through our scholarship was a victory over everything he'd represented. The extended family gradually found new equilibrium. Those who'd stood by Daniel faded from our lives, unable to reconcile their worldview with his conviction. But others reached out, admitting they'd been wrong, asking to rebuild relationships. We welcomed those who came with genuine remorse and commitment to healthier dynamics. Family gatherings evolved into potluck affairs where everyone contributed equally, no one person controlling the narrative or holding financial power over others. Aunt Helen presided over these like the matriarch she'd become, my mother's spirit living on through her sister's warmth. A year after the trial, we announced our pregnancy at one of these gatherings. The joy was infectious, everyone celebrating new life emerging from so much destruction. Jake's parents cried already, planning their roles as grandparents. My father, now in assisted living but stable, sent a card with shaky handwriting. May this child know only love, never control. May they choose their own path. May they forgive better than I did. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever written to me. We named our daughter Hope for obvious reasons, with Helen as her middle name, to honor the aunt who'd stood by us when standing was costly. Letters arrived periodically from Daniel in prison. At first, they were angry screeds blaming everyone but himself. Then they shifted to self-pity, painting himself as a victim of circumstances. I didn't read them, forwarding them unopened to my lawyer in case they contained threats. But Monica read hers, tracking his psychological state. He's getting therapy, she told me after one letter. Not by choice, but it's required. The therapist is making him confront things. He actually admitted he was wrong in the last letter. First time ever. I don't believe he's truly changed. But maybe there's hope. Maybe. We agreed that redemption was possible for anyone, but trust once shattered required extraordinary effort to rebuild. My father's health stabilized enough for supervised visits with Hope. Watching him with his granddaughter revealed glimpses of the man he might have been without the poison of control and fear. He was gentle, patient, content to follow her lead in play rather than directing it. One afternoon, as Hope napped in his arms, he spoke more clearly than he had in months. I failed you and your mother. Let grief become fear, fear become control. Daniel learned from me, became worse than me. My fault. All my fault. But you broke the cycle. Thank you. His tears fell on Hope's blanket, and for the first time since childhood, I hugged my father without reservation. Jake's impact as an educator continued rippling outward. Former students sent updates from colleges crediting him with their success. Parents requested meetings to thank him for transforming their children's lives. The school board president publicly apologized for the investigation, calling it a dark chapter in the district's history and praising Jake's resilience. They created new policies protecting teachers from false accusations, consulting with Jake on their development. He turned his experience into advocacy, speaking at conferences about supporting educators facing defamation campaigns. Every teacher protected was another victory over those who'd tried to destroy him. As Hope grew from infant to toddler, our house filled with laughter and toys and the beautiful chaos of young life. She had Jake's calm temperament and my determination, a combination that promised interesting years ahead. We told her age-appropriate versions of our story, emphasizing that families come in all forms, that love matters more than money, that standing up for truth is worth any cost. She absorbed these lessons naturally, defending playground friends from bullies with fierce loyalty that made us proud and slightly terrified for her teenage years. The 5th anniversary of our wedding arrived with quiet celebration. We'd survived what should have broken us, built something beautiful from the wreckage of what others had tried to destroy. That evening, as we watched Hope play in the yard Jake's father had helped build, he asked, "Any regrets now?" 5 years later, I considered everything we'd lost: my brother to prison, my father to strokes and regret, family relationships to greed and manipulation. Then I looked at what we'd gained: a marriage tested by fire and proven unbreakable, chosen family who valued love over money, careers dedicated to serving others, a daughter who'd grow up knowing her worth wasn't tied to wealth or control. No regrets, I said finally. Pain, yes. Grief for what should have been, absolutely. But regret, no. Because every hard choice led us here, to this life we've built on truth and love and mutual respect. We couldn't have gotten here any other way. Sometimes you have to lose the family you were born into to find the family you were meant to have. And look at our family, not just us and Hope, but everyone who stood by us, who chose love over fear. That's our legacy. That's what we're leaving her. And it's worth every single thing we went through to create it. As the sun set on our little piece of happiness, I knew our story wasn't unique. Countless people face similar choices between familiar dysfunction and uncertain freedom. Many choose the familiar too, afraid of losing even toxic connections. I understood that fear intimately. But Jake had taught me through his quiet strength and unwavering integrity that real love doesn't demand you choose between them and your family. Real love becomes your family, stands beside you as you build something new, something healthy, something worthy of the next generation, and that's exactly what we'd done. My name is Gwen, and at 32, I've learned that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about who stands beside you when the world tries to tear you down. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from those who would destroy your happiness to maintain their control. I lost my father and brother to their own choices, but I found my true family in the courage to choose differently. And that trade, I'd make it again tomorrow and every tomorrow after that. Because that's what love is: choosing each other again and again, especially when it costs everything, especially then. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. If you've faced similar family betrayal or been forced to choose between toxic relatives and your own happiness, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. How did you find the strength to choose yourself? What helped you build a new family from the ashes of the old? Please like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories of triumph over family trauma and share it with someone who might need to hear that. Choosing love over control is always worth it, no matter the cost. Remember, you deserve a family that celebrates your joy, not one that demands you sacrifice it. Until next time, choose love, choose truth, and most importantly, choose yourself.